Hey everybody, this is the Basics of Digital Painting. I'm Pete Moorbacher. The way this works is that every week I give out a assignment for study, something easy, and the next week we review that work. So if you see your work come up on screen once we get started here, feel free to raise your hand, and you can come on stage. We can chit-chat for a few minutes. I'll go over your work with you, talk with you about it. If you don't want to come on stage, you can't. Don't worry about it. I'm still going to review your stuff the best I can. What we're going to do is we're going to kick things off with the assignment for next week. We're going to repeat it again at the end. And then we're going to get right into the crits. I'm going to try to keep this to an hour so I don't waste your time. All right, so this is the study for next week. We got a dramatic one. This one's fun. I'm posting it here in the chat, and then I'm also going to throw it up in the homework channel. Make sure everybody knows what the homework channel is. I actually remember to promote this thing this week. And we're going to do a little bit of an experiment. So the assignment for this one is, yes, you want to do a study. Obviously, it's very cool. But let's make it anime this time. It's like, this is the thing, is it's such a big, it's such a big thing on the internet right now. Everything being anime style. So let's do anime style. I mean, I'm sure some of you, that's what you do normally, so it's not going to be that much of a stretch. But typically we're out here doing like serious face painting. And I just thought it'd be fun to feel free to take that and interpret how you wish. If you want to do this in a, what do you call it? Like a cell shaded style, that'd be fine. But I don't know. This image looks anime as hell, so why not make it go all the way and just see how it goes? I'm interested to see what y'all come up with. I think it's going to be an interesting challenge. Oh, Delia posted this? Yeah. I usually steal most of my prompt from, we've got a reference, daily study reference channel that Dustin and Delia post in, and I'm always pulling stuff out of that. So that's going to be the assignment for next week. And it's over in the homework channel. I'm just going to make sure that's linked right here. And when you're done with that, go ahead and post it there, and it'll be available for me to potentially grab and review for next week. All right. So the first one we're going to go over today is Tresagion. Tresagion's here, right? Come on up, Tresagion. Hey, how's it going?
Hello. Good. It's going good.
So, what was your experience like with the assignment?
I had a lot of fun. I had been trying to figure out landscape stuff for a personal project I was working on and was having a lot of trouble with it. So, doing this as like a learning opportunity to really just focus in on how I want or how I like painting was really helpful.
Excellent. I'm glad to hear it's helpful. That's the whole point of this thing. I'm just vamping for a second here while I pull up the original. I realized I didn't have that ready. So we can compare it if we want. Okay, cool. Yeah, I love how you said in your comment that you departed a little bit from the initial reference here, but I actually really love the ways in which you stylized and exaggerated the original reference. Even with the mountain, it seems like you've added a bit of additional cragginess to it, but it's bringing in a lot of detail here in the main focus of the image. So when I was looking through it, I just sort of presumed that was what what was in the reference, because it looks very natural. And I think it's very nice.
Thank you.
I did have a little bit of a note for you on the colors. Okay, so there's two notes here. Number one is the sky color to me seems a little odd. We've got this gradient that's going very extreme change in color across the length of the sky over a fairly short distance. So I'm just going to make a new layer here and do a little painting on top of it. You've got it going in the right way, because almost all the time the lighter color is always going to be towards the bottom of the sky, and it gets darker as it gets towards the top. And it is fair to fade from like warmer colors to cooler colors when we have a what do you call it? It's like a sunset scene or a sunrise. But there is a point where it's just transitioning a little too much too quickly, and it
Mm.
looks a little unnatural, especially because the way you have this transition going, it's kind of respecting the shape that the gap between the mountains that we have here. So it looks like the colors are sort of emanating from this crack and coming out from it this way, rather than
Mhm.
being its own gradient that's existing across the whole background of the sky.
Mhm.
And I'm saying that because we're seeing this kind of bowing arc to it. Is it because are you imagining that like the sun is kind of just off the outside of the composition here, and we're sort of seeing a glow around the sun?
Y- Yes, but I also see uh what you mean by having it just cut off really short. But yes, my intent was that the sun is like just behind where it's brightest there.
Okay. Yeah, I think one of the reasons why that might not be reading 100% right is that like the direction of the lighting here, it doesn't go that
Mhm.
extreme across the surface of the mountain here. And
Mhm.
so it doesn't read to me that like the sun is just right over here off the canvas. So I think that evening out that gradient just a little bit, like flattening it so that it doesn't quote go quite as light or quite as dark, and then trying to get it, you can angle it a bit, I think, but I would try to have it be like a linear gradient. Like,
Okay.
I'm just going to give an example here for clarity. A linear gradient runs in a line like this. You can see that it's got this straight line as it transitions, from one color to another, while
Mhm.
the gradient you have is a bit of a radial gradient,
Mhm.
and it's kind of gradating out in a circle from this one point. I think the thing about the sky is that it's just so big and we're covering such huge distances that we tend to get these kind of like, I think a linear gradient ends up being the more accurate choice for it. And I think that like we have a really strong instinct on how these things are supposed to look naturally. So I think
Mhm.
it's coming off a little strange. So I'm flattening out the gradient here, and I'm also reducing the amount that it's like transitioning, and it hopefully looks a little bit more natural. The other thing is that I learned this the hard way because I made this mistake on a big painting once. When you have snow, the color of snow is always whatever color it's reflecting.
Mhm.
And so you have this really bold color scheme in this image. And you could call it a creative choice because I think it's such a great looking palette and it's so striking. You could say, yeah, it's fine how it is. But I just wanted to make sure, as a note, that you knew you learned the same lesson that I failed on way back in the day, which is that you never really get snow that's brighter than whatever color light it's reflecting. So in this case, we're not reflecting the sky that's back here behind it. We're reflecting whatever sky is on the other side of the camera. So if that means we're seeing a lot of purple color, then this is all going to be a pink or a purple because
Okay.
it's reflecting the color on the other side here. Or if it's going to be orange on the other side of that sky, we're going to be seeing the snow color in the lit area is going to be orange. I pulled in a couple of reference images of mountains to illustrate this. You can see that this whole mountain is turned bright pink because even though the sky in the background is blue, you can see that in the shadowed areas, we're getting in the shadowed areas of the mountain, just like you've done, we are seeing the reflection of the sky color in the shadow. And then in the lit areas, we're seeing the reflection of like where the light is coming from on the other side of the sky, which in this case is bright pink. And then here we're seeing that orange going into a pink. And so that, what I did, the mistake I made was that I didn't realize, I just assumed, like, well, the snow's white, so it's going to be very bright. But I had actually made the snow quite a bit brighter than the color of the sky, and it looked unnaturally bright. And I had someone in like a comment section on Instagram or whatever being like, did you mean to paint the snow the wrong color on purpose? And I'm like, oh my God, being totally shamed in the comment section on this painting that like I've made a bunch of prints of and sold, and I'm like, yeah, okay, fine, I got it wrong, whatever. But I just want to call that to your attention so that you knew that little trick. so that you knew that if you ever are doing this again in the future, this is a good way to get like an accurate color for the snow. And the same thing ends up happening with clouds quite a bit too, is that you're going to get the same color light as like, when we have a really bright sky, when we have a direct sunlight on clouds, we end up seeing, white light creating a white reflection. But when we start getting really brightly colored light, that brightly colored light is going to cast the same color across the clouds. So we have to treat them less like them having their own local color and more like they are mirroring whatever color they're pointing at. And you are doing that in some cases here. I'm not sure if you knew this already or if you were doing it instinctively, but you're doing it right in some of the cases in the image. And then other parts, you're getting this like really extreme contrast on the snow. And the contrast looks really cool. So there's probably some way of tuning this to make just a little bit of change. Maybe it's in the sky color behind it, that if you use less extreme colors or something that's a little flatter, then maybe like we can imagine that the light that's coming in is still fairly light, white colored, and all of the snow and the clouds, they're reflecting the white of the sun. And then, the other parts of the image where we're getting the oranges and the blues are reflecting different colors across the sky. But right now, we're not seeing a lot of the same colors from the sky reflected in the shadows, and we're not seeing the same colors of the light reflected in the white parts here. And so I think that the color of the sky is looking a little bit incongruous with the rest of the image.
Okay.
All right. That was a lot. Any questions?
No, that was really helpful.
Great. I love the texture of this painting. I think you've done an excellent job. And thank you so much for doing the homework.
Yeah, thank you.
Great. All right. Next up, we don't necessarily need to keep this up. Knight. I don't think Knight's here. I wanted to pull up Knight's thing in case Knight was here. It's a interesting style to this painting. It's very energetic and expressive. It's very abstract. I like it. Or impressionist more than abstract. I should use my terms right. I think that the colors are really cool. I like the super impressionist look to it. I've been getting a lot of questions recently, and I've been getting some spam emails from Rebelle. I think Rebelle has a new version out. It's a painting program that focuses on physical simulation of painting materials, oil paints, watercolors, stuff like that. People especially like the way it simulates the process of physical watercolors in a digital environment. I was curious, hey, maybe this is a Rebelle image, and I wanted to ask Knight about their experience with Rebelle, but without being able to ask any questions, sorry. Knight, feel free to come back anytime when we're writing the class. I'd love to talk to you about what you're using to get this look. It's a cool look. Personally, I'm a big fan of digital paint as digital paint and not so much texture, but this amount of texture is, I think, a really great tool to have in the arsenal. It's something I've actually been kind of curious about myself as like one more tool to have in the tool belt. And it's the sort of thing where I do wonder what this would look like if there were layers of more controlled, more refined marks mixed in with the more impressionistic ones, or because I think that this is a great base. And I think as like rest areas and supporting areas, this kind of super impressionistic style is really, really interesting visually, and I like the way that it seems to be simulating like layers of paint, like bits where it's gotten scraped, the darker paint has gotten scraped away, and you can see sort of lighter paint underneath. I love that kind of underglow effect that you get in painting. I've faked that, tried to fake that myself plenty of times with digital paint, and so it's cool to see this. Fun work. Went to one of their talks, and it's nice to have like version 5 something, and I also got for $10 when I saw it on sale a few years ago. Yeah, I think Rebelle is also, really cheap. So anybody wants to play with it and use it in part and then like take it into Photoshop and paint it and refine it, like it might actually be like a really cheap thing to pick up. I love when perpetual licenses are under $50. I think that buying art software is a great way to spend money. And so if Rebelle is that cheap, even if it's not something I'm personally going to use, might be worth checking out for any one of you guys. All right, Laravee's up next. Laravee was here, right? Laravee's here. I was yelling at Laravee a minute ago. Hey, Laravee, how's it going?
How's it going? It's good.
So what was your experience like with the assignment this week?
I had a ton of fun. This was my first time using gradient maps.
Mm-hmm.
And that was really, really fun. I get it now. I do feel like it's a little more timid in hindsight, like the intensity of the color
Sure.
that I could have brought in. But otherwise, I love it. It was really fun.
Great. I want to go a little deeper with it, and I wanted to give you some tips on where to go next with the color. Sound good?
Okay.
All right.
Yeah.
So gradient maps I always like as a kind of base for adding color. So, maybe you've got 2, maybe you need 3, maybe you need 4. There's like always more that you can add, and then you can kind of shuffle them around and be experimenting with the order that they're in, the intensity that they're in, and try out and see what are all the different kind of interesting results that you get. And one of the things I also like about them is that they come with a mask already on them. So I love taking a piece like this and going, oh, red. Yeah, this piece needs more red, but it's too red. And so instead of pulling around on the handles in here and try to like move where that red's going to land in the composition, one of the things I like to do is just take a linear gradient and maybe just mask it and try it both ways. Look at that.
Mm.
So now we
Wow.
have the red just lower down, and then we can kind of gradate that red and find like, well, how much of the composition do we want to go a little bit more red, right? And that's one way that we can add additional layers of color into something like a gradient map in order to get a more thorough result before we switch back to working with other tools. The other thing is, I think gradient map is really good for getting a kind of loose, rough initial pass. My favorite one, I'm just going to switch your thing to black and white here really, really fast. One of my favorite gradient maps is this one for my gradient map pack called Walking Home. It looks like this. And what it does is you can see in some parts of it, it's kind of bluish. Other parts, it's kind of orangish. Other parts, it's not really doing anything. But what it creates automatically is this kind of like halfway to color appearance, because it creates a separation between where the warm areas and cool areas are. I've got an inverted one here that like it's just like a couple differences. Like here, this one, now we're getting cool areas where the shadows are going to be, and then we get some warmer areas around the edges and like in the sky. And the value of this is that, hey, maybe this isn't the right colors overall, but what we do get is a separation between some areas of the painting are going to be warm and some are going to be cool. And on top of that, we can then start to build stuff like, hey, we want to add like a whole big splash of color with another gradient map. And then we say, okay, cool, excellent, but it's like the wrong shade of red. And maybe the background needs a little color also. Well, you can also bring in other adjustment layers. Adjustment layers are they're all kind of great. Two of the ones that I would look for to solve this problem to push forward from here is like selective color or color balance. Color balance allows us to just sort of be like, oh, we want it more blue, we want it more red. You can choose to say just in the highlights, we want to bring in some more yellows. Maybe make it a little orange overall, and then in the shadows we want to cool things off, bring in some cyans and blues. And so because these are adjustment layers, you can sort of switch them on and off and get results like that. Selective color is really good for the same reason, that you can kind of pick what layer or what like part of the image you want to start doing weird stuff to. And so you can pick just the whites and start adding color into just the whites using that. But then you can also say, you know what? Those reds that I was doing, what if they were all less red? Or what if they were less yellow? And you can start to twist the colors that are already there in a way that, is a little bit more direct than what you get out of a gradient map. So you've got options of taking what you already have and continue to refine the relationship between the colors and also like push around sort of where they're landing on the canvas. I think that in this case, you have this golden color over a lot of the lit parts. And so something like this red here might be good to like start to add a little bit more diversity in the color. And like, with a sunset, you end up with like pinks and oranges in addition to those golden colors. So I think that continuing to push more adjustment layers to kind of like build the diversity of color and like refine it and like move it around might be a really good choice. One of the other things that I do is sometimes I just go hue saturation, which allows you to shift, kind of collectively shift all the hues one way or the other. And it's a good way to check like, well, okay, so it's maybe a little too yellow and blue. What if it was a little bit more orange and cyan? And so you just kind of like twist the whole thing in unison. You can see these two color bars at the bottom. The place in which they line up just kind of shifts. It can look kind of like psychedelic at times, but it can be good for doing a kind of overall shift where the relation between the colors on the color wheel stay the same. But and then you can also pitch the saturation up and down if you feel like you're not getting enough saturation or too much saturation. The lightness tends to either overly darken or wash things out. So for this purpose, I tend to not do that. So there's a lot of options here to continue to explore with the color, even before you lay a brush on the page. The other thing that I typically do when I'm using gradient maps and for this is because, so I was just saying before that I like these kinds of gradients that just kind of define like some areas become warm and some areas become cool. Well, when I've got that starting to build up, it gives me an opportunity to just sort of paint in some overlay layers, overlay, hard light, soft light, and pick some colors in specific to lay in like spots wherever I feel like they're appropriate. So if you wanted to grab like a nice, I was just looking at this reference of this mountain with the really pink color here. So like maybe a lighter pink color to reflect on the snow, maybe a little bit darker than that, because you push it down, and then you can sort of roughly approximate in some of these colors using the using hard light to kind of build a color palette more directly, just using the brush tool. And the advantage here of the gradient maps is that because they're creating a kind of basis for some of these colors, where they're trying to maybe push a little more red into this. When we glaze additional colors over the top of them, we end up with warmer and cooler variants of them because of the way they're mixing over the top of the gradient map. So like if you were to do this over a black and white image, things might look a little flat and stale, but when you do it over the top of an image that's got a gradient map on it, you start getting something that feels a little bit more three-dimensional and in full color, which is what we're aiming for. So that's a lot of tips. That's like I'm shotgunning tips at you. Do you have questions? Please ask me to go over anything that sounded interesting that I went over too fast.
I was just looking at the thing you selected was called proportion, right?
Proportion?
Yes. On the right. And I can also play this back at any time. But in
for
general,
which part?
We're sliding like the hue and saturation bars and the contrast
Oh,
bars.
yeah. So the hue and saturation, that's down here where you find the gradient map is this in the adjustment layer bar here. That was the hue saturation adjustment.
Oh, okay, gotcha. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. And so you can slide these bars here. You also, if you hit this colorize button, you can just sort of lay a whole color over the entire thing. So if there's ever an element or a layer that you just want to add like one hue over the whole thing, the colorize button here will like allow you to pick a hue and then the saturation level It's like
Okay.
super
Gotcha.
super fast way of adding like one big color. So like, looking at this here, we've got this darker blue over everything. You can see I'm able to take it from grayscale to like that dark blue right away. And then if we start laying some warm pinks on top of it with like, I'm using a hard light layer to glaze these on top of each other. And you could start to get some warm pink light over the top of it and it's an opportunity to get playful with the color. That's the main thing I want to express here, is that there are a lot of tools to kind of poke in and play with and just have fun doing it wrong. It's not about finding like what's the right tool for the job or what is like the correct way to add color. There is no correct way, and the more you can kind of embrace being wrong about it in a way that's interesting, the more you're having fun and playing and getting a bigger, stronger, more interesting, more unique result out of the whole thing. And I think you're going to get like more results that you're going to really enjoy. The more you can just sort of play around with all the tools, try them all out, see what they're all doing for you, and then try to like, just roll with it. Especially if you get results that look insane and feel like no one would ever do this. Like I always think like, well, yeah, that's true, but what if, like what if putting bright pink over this dark blue actually is super cool and does make a ton of sense, even though it's maybe not what you had in your mind. Like the thing I love about all of these tools is that they allow you to just kind of try stuff and see what it looks like and then, riff on it. Like you get to yes and with your artwork. That's like a lot of fun.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it on this, and it feels like learning it as a tool feels like Pandora's box with how much color and stuff you can add in.
The main struggle is not like how inventive can you get. It's like, how do I rein this in? How do I rein it back in so it doesn't break my work and make it look
Yeah,
totally insane? Because
deep frying a little bit.
yeah, you can get it deep fried pretty fast. And so you need to just like lightly season it rather than like completely roast it.
Yes.
And then, I've done a bunch of layers here. Now I'm like, oh, okay, well, what if I turn some of those back on? What did that actually do? And like, yeah, there's a lot to explore. So like keep digging in on it, keep coming back and showing me what you're up to with it. And if you've got more specific questions next week or in the future, hit me up. I'll bring you up. We'll talk about it. Okay?
Okay, that sounds perfect. Thank you so much.
Thank you. All right. Moving on to the next one. Speaking of on ongoing conversations, Abarth. Who is he here? Oh no, is Abarth not here? Dang, we keep having this like really productive conversation about color. He says, I hope you and your family are safe from the hurricane. Yes, Abarth, thank you very much. We are all doing very, very good. I wanted to pull him up because we've had this ongoing conversation where he's been progressively going through the same exploration about adding color from black and white using the method that I normally do. And he's got his steps in here going from black and white, gradient map, some hard light over the top, and he's getting bolder, more saturated results than he has been in the past. One of the things that has been part of this conversation is that he's been tiptoeing into color a little bit at a time, worried about overdoing it, and I've been trying to encourage him to like use more tools, take more passes, continue to dial it up until like you go a little bit too far and then maybe dial it back a little bit. And it feels like he's really getting it. And I see that like, in like the snowy area here on the top of the mountain, we're getting some really bright oranges, the kind of saturated color that I don't know if I've seen from any of his prior studies, which is awesome to see. And then he's dialing it back a little bit as he's starting to get into his rendering. And that is, that's how it goes. You go a little bit too far, you dial it back. It's so much better than trying to tiptoe into the final like level of like color and saturation at the very end. It's so much easier to just blast all the color in and then sort of peel away the parts you're not going to use, paint over the bits that you don't like. But like you want to have a lot to draw from, especially if you're just, you're painting using the eyedropper tool for a lot of your work. things are going to start to mush together and gray out a little bit as you blend, because that's how digital paint works. And so you want to have bold, saturated colors to be able to draw from in order to mix them together to get secondary colors that still feel very lively. The thing if I would have a critique about this, Abarth looks like he's struggling a little bit with the clouds. So it's no longer a conversation about color. Now there's other stuff on the table. I like the initial blockout of a lot of these clouds. Big, rough shapes. The amount of value that's inside of them, I think, is very good. But then once they start to get refined, I think we're losing some of that range of value. Some of the darker parts are starting to lighten up. Everything's starting to kind of unify in color. And we're losing a lot of these beautiful secondary colors that are happening here. This is one of my favorite parts about this process, is that you get all of these little weird colors that arise from inside the way that the blending modes mix together. So we've got areas that like are a little bit more purple, a little bit more orange. And it's like giving us a lot of little colors to draw from and mix from. And so I'm seeing the subtleties between them and I'm like, okay, great. I would want to push that even a little further. Maybe we have the color wheel open and we tilt things a little bit more so that we can get some saturated marks like near where we're getting edges to bring up that chromatic like terminals to the edges of shadows a little bit more, grabbing these really saturated colors and these highlights and making sure that like the brightest parts of the clouds are capturing a lot of that color and light, and trying to maintain those colors and push them around and find homes for them inside the final image is like the goal from here forwards. And it looks like some big chunky texture brushes might have started to blot things out. And this is what happens with digital color mixing a lot of times. When you start mushing them over the top of each other, they tend to kind of neutralize each other in a way that is like not as true with traditional paint as it is with digital paint. Like with traditional paint, you'll sometimes, you'll mix together the saturation a bit. You'll get the flecks of paint will both be mixing together in the medium, and they might be countervalent to each other and like countering each other. But like with digital paint, it just, the math that they do to calculate color mixing is just not that accurate. And it will often start to like dull and gray your colors. And I don't feel like we're getting the kind of variety of color that we're seeing in this initial color pass here. And so my recommendation is to find a way of just hunting for those nice, beautiful colors up close when you go to do the rendering. Zoom in a little bit, find these colors and just sort of pluck them out, and maybe even like give them a little extra juice if they need it, and like cherish them. Like this is like the best part about this process is how you get all of these random little like wells of shadow and saturation and light. They're like these are like little flavor nuggets that get that like arise to the surface, at this part of the process, and then now we get to like cook with them. And so it's important to make sure to like really use those bits as they come up. All right. Thanks, Abarth, as always. I hope you catch the VOD. The next person up, we got Sean Gillespie. Come on up, Sean. Hey, Sean, how's it going?
Mic was off again.
Yep, there you go. You got it.
One day I'll come in.
You said this is so valuable and challenging. I'm like, okay, that's an enticing line. Tell me about it.
Well, I started off first. If this had just been a study straight ahead without any colors, I would have been done in like an hour or two, because that part just went really smooth and enjoyable.
You kind of did that,
and then
a little bit. I brought that in also.
Yeah, exactly. So I saved that just for later. But then I found that, painting clouds from reference, getting distracted by all the details, I ended up not painting it anywhere near what it was in the image. And then I tried to lean as much into the texture as I possibly could, and found that to be a back and forth kind of process that was difficult to know when it was enough or too much. If that makes any sense.
I think it looks
And the
great.
sky,
I love how crinkly
Okay.
these like textures are in here, especially in contrast with the smoother snowy areas.
okay, yeah, 'cause I used like some weird critter brush that like pumps out random shapes and different orientations and sizes to try and get some randomness in there,
Mm-hmm.
and then try to dial it back in manually. So, and then I got inventive with the sky, and then had to dial that back in as well because it was a disaster. Spent ages on that. So
Well, I at first when I was looking at this, I thought, wow, he's really gone out on a limb, like making a lot of changes and really pumping up the interest to this image quite a bit. And now I'm looking at it side by side, and I'm surprised at how faithful you were to the original one. You've incorporated a lot of subtleties to like the way that the snow is flowing, and that the light is just catching like the edge of it to make these like parallel lines, and the texture of the rocks I think is very true to the original as well. You've been very meticulous about it, but you've also kind of exaggerated the contrast, exaggerated the color in a way that like makes the whole thing really punchy, and that's pretty cool. So
thank you.
I think you got a really cool result out of this. Like, that like environment art, like landscapes. It's like sometimes it feels a little challenging to figure out like where's the interest in this thing, but I feel like you've kind of instinctively found your way to like making this more eye-catching and interesting, and you haven't even like done anything that dramatically departs from the original source material.
No, aside from the colors, I suppose. Yeah.
Except for the colors, yeah. If you wanted to, the one thing I am seeing in the original that you've departed from a little bit here is there you on the left here you've maintained these like medium-sized cloud chunks. I'm just gonna highlight them here. Like you've got these cloud chunks that are more mid-sized that are running along the side here. They're all like kind of similarly sized. In the original here, they some of these they kind of blend into each other to not like form such a noticeable pattern.
Distinct chunks. Yeah.
And then on the other side here, we have them all kind of forming one big kind of island. While
Yeah,
we
I
have
had them
this-
more distinct before, but then I thought that
it's like
was
this,
similar. The image just kind of straight across almost.
there's this kind of crease down the middle here that I think is like a nice little touch. That it would be nice to be able to like differentiate the bigger shapes a little bit, add a little bit more variety to the big shape here by giving it like this crease, because all the little textures and flares and stuff are all so nice. You do so much work zoomed in with your detail so well that I think the thing I just want to keep reminding you of, the thing that I've talked about with you many times, is just keep an eye out for those larger,
Mediums.
broader shapes. And you can see this is a really subtle change. I'm just nitpicking here because you've got a beautiful study. But these broader shapes here, there's this crease in here that I think adds some visual interest to breaking this up a little bit. And I'm just going to do before and after. And it just gives us like a little slope to kind of like our eye to kind of come down in here. It breaks up this larger island so it doesn't appear to be so flat and on a plane. Instead, now it's got a little bit of more overlap. So there's like, layers of clouds kind of overlapping on top of each other. It's subtle, but beautiful work overall. Do you have any questions for me?
I was wondering what your opinion maybe was on the background, the sky.
Oh, background sky?
I mean, I don't really like it.
You don't really like it? I think it looks fine.
Yeah. All right, yeah.
It's like again, if I were to nitpick, like in the original here, we can see that this very loose, streaky cloud, you've got it where it gets a little darker here and a little lighter up here. But I think if it's going to get lighter here, it'd be taking on some of the same colors, whatever this is. And so that means, I think, bringing in some of this orange here to maybe not up to the same degree, but sort of moving in that same direction, bringing in a bit of that hue. And then I'm laying it in really broadly here. And then it'd be trying to break it up so that it's got a little bit of that crumbly cloud texture, but in a very broad, non-specific way. There's no hard edges anywhere in here. And yet, if we squint our eyes and we zoom out a little bit, you can still see where there
is some shape in there.
Yeah, there's still some shape where we get these divots in here and stuff. And so there's the challenge then of like, can we create a little bit of intentional form to it, but without ever crafting anything that is tight enough of an edge to really give it serious definition? There's always this question hanging with clouds where it's like, okay, well, what like level am I looking at it here from? Am I trying to make some adjustment to it that's like from zoomed out and very far away, and it's going to be completely invisible from up close? Am I doing tight little details? Like there's a lot of like, you need to approach the way you're making marks totally differently depending on whether you're making these like big changes to the bigger shape of it or the tinier details. And it like, sometimes they kind of work against each other. So you kind of have to zoom out, make these very soft changes, and then zoom in and go and start to like find where you've made a bunch of crappy marks that need to get blended in a little bit and start to work at those a little bit, and then make sure that those didn't end up causing anything to look weird from far away. And I think when you watch somebody who's done a screen recording from, they're not just recording their brushstrokes, but you see a screen recording of somebody like sped up in Photoshop. It's this like incessant like zoom in, zoom out, zoom in, zoom out, and it flashes back and forth. It's very hard to watch. Like in the moment, like it requires you to constantly be switching your perception of the piece from up close to far away, up close to far away. As like a traditional painter, you'd be like moving your head back and forth, zooming in, zooming out, just like constantly. There's that, I think, caricature of the artist where they're kind of like back on their heels with their chin up, like leaning back away from the canvas, and then kind of squinting and looking up close again. And, having the equivalent of that is that incessant zooming in, zooming out, just like.
Do you ever find if you zoom, I always find when I zoom out again, I get distracted by another part of the painting.
Yeah.
So I find it hard to like stick to the same thing for long enough to actually concentrate on it and get a good handle on it. And I mean, I need to just be aware of when that's happening, of course, but.
Yeah, that's it. Some of it is just a matter of like slowly developing these habits so that they work for you.
Yeah.
And you find that, I'm doing it again, and, making some changes.
Yeah. I'm going to try a grid or something so that I can be like, all right, this is the grid. I'm going to try and just just look at that grid, just look at that square.
Sometimes back in the day when I was like struggling towards the end of a painting, I would just make a layer that was just a bunch of red circles. I'd be like, okay, well, I've got to fix that thing there.
Yeah.
And then this is going to need a little bit of cleanup, and then whatever the color is there. And I would go through and I would circle the areas, and then I would have to like stand up and walk around because I'm like, that was a lot of red circles. You just realize that if you circle every area you're dissatisfied with on a painting, you just have like a whole painting full of red circles that you're like, oh God, this is a lot. Like you think you're almost done, and you're like, this is a lot of work actually. But you just sort of like, get a cup of tea, get back to work, turn on a movie, pop up a Discord, whatever, and then you get back to it. And at some point, you've worked through all those things, so you decide, I'm done, finished. This is as much as I'm going to do. You have like a great love for details and rendering, and it's a blessing and a curse. I think it gives a lot of appeal to your work, but I think it also means that you're going to be spending a lot of time kind of pacing around, fussing over things that other people might not even be noticing. You're like, oh.
Yeah, for sure.
Are you going to criticize me for having skipped that little cloud? chunk, that little H-shaped cloud chunk that's in the front there. You know, like, is it really complete? I mean, it does kind of add this sort of yin yang, you know, element to the composition here. You know, like, and then is it too soft? And then you sort of try to firm it up, and then it's look too much like the little bits of rock in the background. Do I need to do a different brush? Should I have it on a separate layer? And you like take it out, and you're like, oh my god, when I just take it out, then it's not a problem anymore. Like, there's so much second guessing, and the more you work on it, especially if you're 40 hours in on a painting, your level of context goes into the toilet. It can be really handy.
Yeah, definitely.
Second set of eyes when you're doing things that intensely. Second set of eyes to just sanity check your work against another person. Trust them when they tell you it's fine. Trust them when they tell you something over again. Somebody who you really feel like understands like what you're trying to do and how you're working to get a sanity check on stuff. And then, you know.
You mean talk to people?
I mean, yeah. I mean, I had a running meeting with Ash on the server every single week where we'd go over each other's paintings to like sanity check stuff. And just having an art buddy that you can like run stuff past is something I've done intermittently, and it's worked out really well. But you know, one of the things that
there was a community somewhere where you could find.
Yeah, if there was only a community somewhere where you could find other artists. But the problem is like you need to find. I try not to do it in public spaces. Oftentimes when people ask me, oh, what are you doing? I'll explain my difficulties that I'm having with a painting. And then they'll start pitching suggestions, and I'll hate it. I'll hate the suggestions. It's not what I want, and I'll be immediately grumpy. And then they're like apologizing to me in DMs, and I'm like, not your fault. I was talking about my problems in a public space. You were trying to offer solutions. It's not a problem. And then, you know, it's like, I when I really want that feedback, I am specific about seeking out people who I know want to be helping, not only want to help, but also have like the kind of appreciation for the same things as me and an eye for the same things, so that they can be specifically helpful. Because it's, even if someone's a good painter, you can't always get the right opinion, because there's a lot of people that just, they appreciate different things about painting. They're aspiring to do their work in a different way. And so you might be, whatever thing you feel like you might be struggling with, they might think that you're overdoing it. Oh, you're doing all this detail? Why? Well, you're like, I love detail. It's kind of like my thing. It's what I'm doing. You need to find someone who can, like, you know, understand and appreciate what you're doing. And that's, you know, it's not that hard. But it requires some amount of, like, I don't know, mindfulness about your relationships and your relationship to the work. You're asking about the sky. I think the streakiness of the sky is like mostly okay. The more I look at it, the more
I want to have some interest.
There's a little bit of like, just wish that gradient of the sky was a little bit more there. Just a little bit. I don't know. I'm nitpicking again. Nothing too big. All right. Any more questions?
Thanks so much, Pete. No, that's okay. I've taken up too much.
All right. Great. All right. We're moving on to the final one. It's Dr. Sensible. He's here, right? All right. Great. And I've got your YouTube video queued up. How's it going, man?
Hey, Pete. Good. Long time no see.
Yeah, I know. Let's see. I'm going to mute this here. And then this is what? Oh, 4 minutes. Okay. So I don't need to play at double speed.
No.
How was your experience with the assignment this week?
3 weeks ago, let's go back into the memory banks here.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I set some rules for myself with this one to use the round brush for most of this. And I think that was actually probably the wrong choice for a lot of this. But I was just trying to get it done quickly. I think I put it in the chat. I think I did this in an hour or something like that.
An hour. Wow. Yeah, we had talked before about how maybe you were working inefficiently and spending layers of paint when you didn't need them.
Yeah. So yeah, I think I went like an hour and 3 minutes or something like that. But
that's efficient.
Yeah, I was just trying to get it done quickly, and so I would have done a lot more with it. I think I should have definitely used a little bit more on the textural side for a lot of the the kind of niceness of the rocks and the terrain itself. But
Mhm.
it was cool.
Yeah, I have a round brush and I have a textured brush. I use the round brush for stuff like the clouds, and I use the textured brush for stuff like the rocks, for exactly that reason, because it's just like it can be a pain in the ass to like try to like go and make all the little crinkly edges and stuff with a round brush, and then it can be a pain in the ass to try to smooth out all of the soft clouds if you're using a lot of texture brush. So trying to find the right brush for the right job. I famously have like, I don't know if it's famous, but I use like 3 brushes for most of my process. And so it's like I've got my round brush, I've got my soft like airbrush for making like some of these like larger, softer transitions, and then I'm using my crinkly textured brush for any time where there's a bunch of little rocks or whatever. I keep thinking I'm going to expand it. I've played around with it a few times. One of these days, I'll actually find a bunch of texture brushes I like. But for something like this, yeah, it's like finding the right brush makes a big difference as far as how long it takes. I really like how far you've gotten really quickly with this. I think the rough layout of it, it looks like it came together really nicely. And I know you're saying that maybe you used the wrong brush for it, but honestly, I think that like instead of you building up layers and layers of values to get to here, just blocking in with thick, bold colors seems like it really did something good.
Yeah, it started me off really well. I think I just got a little lost in the middle of it.
Once you got your brush both really small and a lot lower saturation, it looks like that's when it started to slow down and get a little muddier at the same time.
Yeah, for sure. So I think it was at this point that I started playing around with like, okay, let's get some texture in here and not try to do it all by hand. So that started working out a little bit better. And I think some of my time on this was just like messing around with different brushes, trying some different ones from like the watercolor library. I tested some different things. But yeah, not to too much success, I don't think.
Yeah. The soft brush in the clouds is creating a look that I'm not a big fan of. The place that I like using the soft brush is like you at first were, I love being able to see the way you put this together because it allows me to give much more specific critique. All right. So like when you're laying in like this area over here, you've got this like round brush that's like at really high intensity, and you get like you're chunking in like thick colors, and they're like not blending, and you're going back and forth trying to like get all this in. That's where I love using the soft brush. Like for a quick, if you've got an area that's like a soft, it's just smoothly going from one color to another. That's where the soft brush ends up like being great for really early block in, because you just make it big. You just go like, okay, well, that's it. That's the whole thing. It's like 2 strokes. And my Photoshop has disappeared. There it is. It's back. And so when you start like that and you've got this like really soft gradient, like loosely applied over a large area very quickly, it works for you in a really strong way. And then you can go in over the top of it and start to like use a texture brush or round brush or whatever, and start to like work in some additional like surface texture and stuff.
Yeah.
On the clouds, you are getting this like speckle pattern, I think, from the strange like watercolor simulation stuff that's trying to create like a paper texture, but you're also getting this kind of like soft airbrushy glow that looks, this may sound insulting, but this is just what it reminds me of. Those airbrush t-shirts that you see at like a state fair where it's like Bugs Bunny or whatever. It's like
or the ones where they make like a galaxy with on the can.
Yeah, kind of like it. There's like an airbrushy look that I think is like what we want to avoid when it comes to using soft brushes. The thing is like it looks fine at this distance. It looks really good at this distance, but it looks, I think, bad at this distance. What's weird about soft brushes is that like they call to themselves in like a really strong way at a distance like this, that is like very odd. Like the closer you zoom in, the more it just looks normal. But then the more you zoom out, the more it looks like airbrush. And it's kind of like, I don't know. It's not my favorite. Like sometimes the tool marks, I think, add a lot of character. And I think that there's something about this kind of blobby look that you get out of a soft brush that when you try to soften things like clouds with it, it tends to look kind of like blobby and uneven in a way that is like deeply apparent at a distance. So if you're up close trying to like smooth things out, trying to add detail, and you're using a soft brush to try to like do blending, you're like, okay, it looks pretty good. And then you zoom out and it looks like, oh, super airbrushy.
Yeah, and very muddy.
Yeah, and it gets muddy. So this is actually where I like this very oil painterly like brush, because with something, when you're trying to go and blend something like clouds, using like the hard round with the flow turned down does a ton of really good work, because it allows you to blend as smoothly as you need to, but without creating this kind of like airbrushy look. It allows you to like keep the strokes kind of contained. So I think that once you've got your loose block in of clouds, this is where I paint a lot of clouds, which is why I'm like this constant advocate for this particular brush.
Yeah, I was going to say I don't. So it's like it's a new thing for me.
It's really good at organic stuff like skin and clouds, which it's like I usually have a figure with clouds behind them, so I use it a ton. But then like we start to get into landscapes, and all of a sudden it's like, it's like good in the sky and the cloud areas, and then it gets like kind of like less useful when we start trying to paint a bunch of little individual rocks, which is where digging into the texture brushes where you start getting some more grit, some more grain, random like chunks of things. My texture brush is really limited, but like there is like a million really good options to be able to kind of automatically create little bits of rock texture for you that are going to save you time and keep you sane. I also noticed that you're using the gradient map on normal mode. It looked like you're using it on normal mode, right?
Maybe.
So
I do not remember.
It looked, I was like making a note of it as we were watching it. I was like, is that normal mode? What's going on? Yeah, it says normal.
And that's an abnormal thing to do. Clearly.
Yes. There's nothing normal about using a gradient map on normal mode. Normal mode is like the most insane blending mode you could use for gradient maps, because you get results like this. They look kind of like the ending to 2001: A Space Odyssey. And so you can get something maybe that looks kind of like normal, especially if you like turn it down a little bit. Like let's just do this. You can get something that like up at 100% on normal, it looks like completely insane. Maybe you turn it down a little bit, you get something a little bit like that. But the trick to these is that you change the blending mode to one of these overlays here. I usually use soft light. And so now you see that like we're not getting the 2001: A Space Odyssey look. We're getting a bunch of like weird color palettes.
Yeah. Okay.
And so that is like the basis for a lot of my color stuff is like, it's not just a gradient map, it's a gradient map with the blending mode. Because then, we can use something like, this is just orange and yellow, but it's like, it's just kind of creating an orange and yellow wash over the whole thing. It's like putting a gel over the lights more so than it is like turning it into like psychedelia. But you can get some psychedelic results. Like you can still get some like insane color bands and stuff, which, hey, maybe that's actually really cool. Maybe like what if this, but we mask it down certain bits so it's like not as intense in some parts. And there's always like, I always love to like see the most insane possible result and go like, yeah, okay, yeah, it's crazy, right? But what if? Just stay with me for a second. What if we balance out the sky a little bit and we keep some of these like oil slick colors? Like, what does it look like then, really? So sometimes I'll want to do something really, really normal, like this, or like this. And it's like, this is pretty norm core as far as colors go. And then you can build on top of it with any kind of multiply, overlay, soft light, hard light, whatever you want. Even just like normal, but like kind of lightly glazing in some colors.
Sure,
You can get whatever you need. Just taking a bright color in normal mode and just putting it down to 10% and just lightly glazing it over the top. You can start to like build up something that feels, more or less like sane and sensible, right? It's
I
right
mean,
there.
I'm always trying to be sensible. So
Yeah, gotta
I
be
like that.
sensible, right? So now we're getting something that looks like, hey, that doesn't look insane at all. That looks actually kind of normal.
Mm-hmm.
The gradient map thing as a tool is my favorite thing, in part just because it allows me to look into a bunch of different colored dimensions, kind of like Doctor Strange investigating like the 20 million possible outcomes to what my painting is going to look like.
Yeah.
And then, you also get to like, you can check all of them and then you can hit the reverse button and then check the inverted version of all of them also. And figure out, hey, is any of these doing something that's like actually kind of super cool? Like, because it screws with your contrast in addition to your color. Some of these, they start to get psychedelic and kind of strange. And other ones,
And that can be cool.
they can be cool. And then some of them are like just pretty normy. Like something like this, pretty normy. It's messing with the contrast a little bit and say, hey, maybe that's too much. Dial it down halfway. Just dial the opacity down to 50%. And then, now we're back in like fairly normal ass territory again. Like you can see, like if I was just doing like a straight copy of the reference here, it's actually not that far off.
Mm-hmm.
And this is like, even when I'm doing studies, I do this sort of thing because you can actually replicate like the colors of an image pretty accurately, pretty quickly using this technique. So it's good for experimentation, but it's actually not terrible for just replicating a normal result. So what I've done here is I have this gradient here that's kind of upside down. So it's like putting a lot of lights in the darks. It's causing it to fade the contrast back a little bit. And that's at soft light at 50%. And then I just have a normal layer where I'm just glazing a couple colors over the top, just like thin, washed out, like oil painting glaze over the top. But we could also change this blending mode a little bit if we wanted a little bit more saturation to poke through. This is looking kind of washed out, but the reference is kind of washed out. So it's all
that already looks a little more interesting, and then I can just kind of paint on top of that.
That's exactly it. So like once you get the colors that you want out of this, then you can like just start sampling from them and pulling all the things that you like. So you're like, oh, I wish this part was a little bit brighter blue. And you don't need to be precise about it at all, because the plan is that you go in afterwards and you go, okay, well, now I've got generally the color that I want here, but it looks kind of fucked up. I'm just going to grab some of the nearby color and squish it around. And now we're getting everything we want.
Yeah.
And it's like, it's just treating every part of the process in its own time. Each challenge broken down into like its own little segment, and be like, we're just going to try to introduce all the colors that we're going to need later at this step, and then we're going to do details at a step after that, and like treating each of these different steps of the challenge in their own specific moment in the painting allows us to, I feel like I have like a tiny brain, like my brain is like the tiny opening, like a ship in a bottle, right? And the challenge is, how do I get this ship through like the tiny opening of my brain and then back out again at full size? And so the solution to that is to like break it down into little pieces, pass it through my tiny brain, and then reassemble it inside the bottle. And so like I think that's the challenge of painting for most people, which is, it's not about like, how do we like practice in order to expand our understanding of this and like make our brains huge. It's about how do we meticulously disassemble the information on one side so that it can be reassembled on the other. It's about breaking down challenges into discrete pieces that we're smart enough to be able to solve, rather than like, becoming Megamind. Like we're never going to be like that much smarter or more insightful. I think it really is about becoming more disciplined in these like discrete ways of like figuring out how to like disassemble the problem in smarter ways. And so that's like I'm hoping that's the whole discussion we're having here is like, how can we play around with the order that these things are happening in and what tools are being used at each step? Because I think that if you find a way that like maps to your understanding of how you're sort of visually breaking down an image, I'm giving suggestions on my process here, but however works for you to break down bits of that ship, pass it through the neck of the bottle, and then reassemble it. Everyone's going to have a different order of operations in order to do that at peak efficiency. And so the more you can play around with different ways of doing it and seeing what's like just clicking for you, that's what we're aiming for.
Yeah, and I think a big part of that, for me at least, is that I need a lot more reps, right?
Mm-hmm.
Just to get that experience of, like we're talking about, you paint clouds all the time, you're going to figure out things about clouds that just eventually become second nature.
Yeah.
Like I'm going through a process right now of designing a bunch of cars for a game I'm working on, and I haven't done that before, so it's like it's a struggle compared to a figure painting, right?
Yeah.
So a lot of these things, it's like it's really great to see these little ways to trick yourself into getting there quicker.
Yeah, they're all tricks. It's all hacks. It's hacks all the way down, and there is some mastery intermixed with all of the kind of hackery that I'm talking about here.
Yeah.
And the two kind of, I think, work nicely hand in hand. These studies ultimately are a playground to be able to like test hacks, and also while you like slowly build mastery over brushwork or whatever. And yeah, the hope is that a lot of these same processes translate into imaginative work as you go and try to apply this to the challenge of how do I assemble a brand new ship from like scratch without having to like, in this case, we're like trying to break it down and pass it through the neck of the bottle. But, if you're doing imaginative work, you still need to pass it through the neck of the bottle. You just don't have a completed model to start with. Like you have to invent it while also pushing it through a neck of a bottle, which is annoying. Like you're like, oh, I need to work on this complex thing, but also my brain's too small to take it all on at once. And so it's like you still need to do that process of chunking and breaking it down, but then you also don't know what you're building, which makes it extra hard. The process of doing imaginative art is like, it's inherently very difficult. And so,
well, it's like we were talking about a little while back, but I think that's part of the broad appeal of the fan work, right? Fan art is that you can take some liberties, but a lot of the work in terms of the imagination part is done for you, and you can just pose it how you want, light it how you want, or just recreate it faithfully, and it makes that frustration part of trying to massage something into being, it takes that away.
Yes, there are layers of difficulty, and like a study is probably the easiest one, and I'd say fan art is one step easier than that, though it can still be very inventive. And then like the hardest one is like, all right, I'm inventing all the rules, I'm doing all the design, I'm coming up with all the concepts, and I'm having to build it from scratch. It's like, yeah, it's very difficult, and I think it's becoming increasingly intimidating for people as they're like becoming self-conscious, because there's a lot of this that's happening in public spaces. You're posting it on social media, you're posting it on places like Discord. But I love this challenge. I love the community of people who are trying to do it, and I don't think it is a problem to struggle or fail with any of this stuff. I think that the discussions we have about how do we do it better, what do we like and don't like about the results that were happening everyone should feel safe to just like fail comfortably in this environment, because we're not going to drum you out for being bad at art. Like, I am happy for everybody who is working on the homework here and getting better all the time. Everybody who I've seen stick around and continue to do this and challenge themselves has gotten progressively better the longer they've done it. It's hard not to when you're putting yourself in the work like this. So thank you everyone who participated. I'm going to have to wrap it up here because I'm already 15 minutes over. Thanks, Dr. Sensible, as always, for sharing your stuff.
Thank you, Pete.
And then I'm just going to go over the homework real quick. Speaking of fan art and stuff, this week we're going to do anime style study. I want you to just make a study of this, but make it anime. There's a lot of people, this is like their whole thing. There's a lot of like popular artists that like their main thing that they do is find cool images on Instagram or like hot girls on Instagram and just draw them in an anime style. It's a whole community. It's like a whole like thing that like I don't have a lot of experience with personally. Hey, maybe it's not gonna be your main thing, but there's something to be learned about it. It's a unique challenge. Let's give it a shot. We got this very cool, very dramatic, very anime looking image. It's in the homework channel. I'm posting it here one more time. I'm gonna hit the link to the homework channel. Feel free to go ahead and post that. I'm gonna look at all the work that gets posted in the homework channel, and I'm also gonna pull 5-6 pieces to talk about next week. I'll be back next Thursday at the usual time. Take a look at the events tab here at Huckleberry. What was it? Discord.gg/Huckleberry if you're catching this on YouTube. Thanks everyone for joining me here in the audience today. It's great to see you guys. It's great to be back. I will see you again next week. Goodbye.